Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 298 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. Well, this week it's my review of the BBKA Spring Convention, a chat about the weather, and also what's happening in and around our apiaries. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Today's podcast is sponsored in part by Healthy Bees, Heavy Hives, a new book on beekeeping today with a focus on helping you maximise your yields and, hopefully, increasing profitability in beekeeping, featuring clear diagrams and beautiful photographs that complement a relaxed and humorous writing style which is both enjoyable and informative to read. Available now at Northern Bee Books, Amazon and all good bookstores both online and in your high street. You'll find links in today's podcast notes. Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Apologies for missing last week's podcast, but I travelled to the Harper Adams University, set in the beautiful countryside of Shropshire in the village of Edmond, which is near Telford for anyone that went to the beekeeping show earlier in the year. I'd been invited by the BBKA to give a talk about my beekeeping year through the monofloral honey that we produce. Basically, my migratory trips from Norfolk to Essex and then up to the North York moors for the heather. On the back of this, I'd also been persuaded to host a seminar for beginner beekeepers and join a panel of experienced beekeepers and scientists to answer audience questions about Varroa control. It was, of course, the BBKA Spring Convention. What I'd like to do is to just share my experience with you, if you don't mind. I arrived late on Friday afternoon after a very long drive from Norfolk and was very impressed, actually, by how well everything had been organised. I was given a room in one of the many student blocks, and after a quick wander around to find my bearings, I arrived at the Friday evening meal. Now, I don't particularly feel terribly comfortable at formal dinners and that kind of environment, but find myself seated on a table of friendly and well-informed fellow speakers, and with a meal that would have suited an expensive restaurant. The event was actually really enjoyable. The following day, I was joined at breakfast by the current BBKA president, Stephen Barnes, someone I've chatted to on the podcast previously, so it was nice to finally meet up in person. My talk wasn't due to start until 11:30, so I had a decent amount of time to wander around the trade show, where the first person I bumped into was my old National Bee Unit boss, Andy Wattam. It turns out he's rejoined the National Bee Unit and finds himself back in his old job as National Bee Inspector. We spent some time chatting about what we'd both been up to since leaving the Bee Unit, and then got onto the subject of the yellow-legged hornet issue. It feels like the same old challenges are there for the Bee Unit, fewer resources and higher demands on everybody, with the hornet currently taking centre stage. We'll see how this year pans out, I guess. Now, I'm not going to list every stand I stopped by at because, well, you'd all get very bored very quickly, I think. But here are a few of the highlights, and also businesses and stands that are important to me for various reasons. After chatting to Andy Wattam, it was through to the Thorns display. Lots for beginner beekeepers to get their hands on, and a new design of hornet trap that looks like it may well be worth a closer look at. I've asked if I can get a couple sent over to me to see how they perform, basically take them apart and see what they are. But it looks like a large bucket with a specifically designed clip-top funnel type lid to help prevent too much bycatch. It's an interesting trap and one that I am looking forward to seeing how it performs. Next to the Thorns stand were my old friends Luke and Susie from Northumberland Honey. Plenty of bottles of fizzy mead on display, but more importantly, a chance to catch up and chat about when new season queens might be available for us. As ever, it's the weather that dominated the conversation, and in fact, all the way round the trade show, the main discussion points centred on when the weather might break and the bees can get out and forage. Opposite Northumberland Honey were a bee suit manufacturer called Oz Armour. Now this isn't a bee suit that I've come across before, I've certainly never tried them out, and it wasn't long before I'd been persuaded to try one on and actually decided to take a couple home to try out this season. All in the interest of research for you guys, of course. First impressions are one of, well, zips and Velcro. There seem to be an awful lot, but look out for the video review later in the season when I've had a chance to wear it in a few times. The trade show at the Spring Convention is split currently between two halls. It's quite nice like this, as it gives a more intimate feel to the event rather than a massive hall where you can easily miss a stand out. In the second hall, I found a lot more traders, a lot more show deals, and another old friend in Paul Beardmore from Modern Beekeeping. For those of you new to my podcast, Paul introduced me to the Honeypaw Langstroth hives, and my journey to find the perfect hive for me really ended at that point. I love the Honeypaw hives almost as much as my bees do, I think. If you've never been to the BBKA Spring Convention, I would recommend it just for the trade show alone, even though it's a fairly long drive, particularly from here in Norfolk. Bargains can be found on the day, and that covers the cost of travel and the entry ticket in most cases. Add to that the wax exchange facilities and the ability to pre-book show sale equipment, and it makes for a much easier, less stressful time than it was in years gone by. My talk was scheduled for 11:30 and it was well attended. The organisers got my talk loaded into the university system quickly and without a hitch, and I think it was well received. My host for the session was the current chair of the BBKA, Diane Drinkwater, again someone I hadn't actually met prior to the weekend, and there you have another good reason for going along to the Spring Convention, a chance to meet up with people you might only otherwise have chatted to online or via Zoom meetings. Diane seemed to think the talk went well. It's always difficult to judge, isn't it? Everyone's so very nice and polite, but I'm sure if it was a disaster, someone would have said something. The biggest challenge for me was trying to get round everything before my afternoon seminar and Q&A panel. Honestly, I gave up trying after a while. Before I could even finish lunch, it was time to host the seminar, called Tips for Beginners. I kind of tried to give a flavour of what to expect and offer up some useful tips on how to get the best from a first season. I think maybe some of the beginners left feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the amount of information I offered up. Given the time again, I think I might make it far more practical. That said, the 90-minute slot flew by, and we almost overran so much as to make me late for the Q&A panel. As a bee farmer, I was there to give a very practical perspective on Varroa control. It's simple to manage Varroa when you have just a small number of colonies, and the feeling I got was that there's a real desire to move backyard beekeepers to Varroa-resistant honeybees, something I'd love to have myself, if only to reduce the dependence and cost of buying in treatments. I'm looking forward to reducing the number of colonies that we have, as it will give me more of an opportunity to take a closer look at our Varroa control and maybe even get a little more specific about the way in which I monitor Varroa. Ultimately, I think the only way that beekeepers here in the UK can move away from the broad use of chemical treatments is by the large-scale production of Varroa-resistant queens for sale to both backyard beekeepers and bee farmers alike. But I think we're a long way off from that point. One major takeaway point for me from this session was a comment made by Martin Gable. He's deputy head of the Kirchen Bee Institute in Germany. He described using mechanical Varroa control, drone brood removal I guess, in July to give winter bees a better chance of developing without pressure from an excessive Varroa population. Now this is something we've not tried, and yet without the autumn treatments that we used to have, it makes sense to drive Varroa numbers down at this important time of the year. Now this may impact on honey production somewhat, but as I'm not looking to expand our honey stockists anytime soon, I think it may be something that we can trial to see if it's effective. That said, all of our overwinter colonies that have made it through to spring right now are looking pretty good. Even the odd few that have very high varroa numbers. Something that I need to address this next week, I think, but more about that another time, probably on a video. Saturday evening was a post-dinner quiz night, something I approached with a certain amount of dread. I found myself on a table with a bunch of beekeepers from the Sheffield area, including our very own Mark Blay. Those of you from regular Coaching Plus Zoom meetings will know exactly who I mean. I was made very welcome, and it soon became apparent that we would not be winning the quiz night prize. What was unexpected was the rather embarrassing singing of Happy Birthday to me. It was my birthday on Saturday last week, and I'd managed to hide the fact pretty well, until another of our Coaching Plus Zoom beekeepers, Fran Barham, very kindly gave me a birthday card right under the noses of the hosts at my morning lecture, and, well, questions were asked. Secret out, it was inevitable that I couldn't hide away in a corner somewhere. You know, I even thought I might drive to Telford for a pizza in the evening in case there was some embarrassing singing. I chose not to, and actually I'm glad I didn't go for a pizza. Thanks to Fran for the birthday card, and thanks to Mark for your company at dinner on quiz night. All in all, I think the weekend was a huge success for the BBKA. If you've never been, you should give it a try. If you've been before and feel it's the same old formula, well, I would give it another try, as there's always something new in beekeeping. You never know, they might invite me back again next year. My thanks to Stephen Barnes, Diane Drinkwater, and particularly to John Adams and Joyce Nisbet for making my visit so enjoyable, but also to all of the many BBKA volunteers who gave up their time to make the event such a huge success for all of us visitors. Moving on to my current beekeeping, well, things really haven't changed that much since the last time I spoke. We've had a chilly series of inspections on the oilseed rape, and actually, despite the cold, the bees have been expanding quite quickly. Some are now on double brood boxes, others have supers on, and there's actually some significant amounts of honey being stored in those supers from the oilseed rape. But it is still very cold. Today, the maximum temperature looks to be about 9 or 10 degrees Celsius, and I think we're in for another showery, chilly week right through until the end of the month. One thing that we did check that has gone really well is the 2 colonies that we united using the newspaper method. We had the queen-right colony on top with the queenless colony beneath, and having taken it apart and had a good look through, everything seems to have worked exactly as it should have. We managed, in what little sunshine and warmth there was, to rearrange the colony, so we now have a double brood setup with a super on top, with the queen excluder sandwiched between the top box and the super. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to then get into that setup, rearrange it back down to a single brood box, and have them ready for the summer flow. We have found around 5 drone-laying queens in amongst all of the colonies. Now this is something that's always disappointing. You get through to the spring, you believe that your colony has managed to get through the winter, and yet somehow the queen has failed. I guess this is a case of a poorly mated queen rather than anything else. We tend to change our queens on a fairly regular basis, so it won't be because the queen is too old and has run out of sperm. It's probably just that she didn't mate particularly well, or some physical abnormality has kicked in and is preventing her from laying fertilised eggs. Either way, we have to deal with these. And the easiest way to deal with this is to shake the bees out on a warmish day, take the hive away, and the bees will drift across to other colonies. Now remember, you need to make sure that they're healthy bees. You don't want to be shaking out bees that carry any form of disease and have those drift into other colonies. But for the most part, I think we're fine in terms of disease. It's just a shame that they've become drone layers. Well, for the rest of this month, it's still looking quite showery. We've got cooler weather all the way through to the middle of next week when it's due to start warming up. Well, at least that's what the forecast says. Colonies will need inspecting, and we do need to get out, even though it's quite cool, and check for queen cells. We are at that point where colonies will start to swarm. And having already lost 2 very early swarms, I want to make sure that we manage that as best we can. We're going to start with the mechanical Varroa treatment. That's popping in a frame with drone brood foundation. That goes into the brood area and hopefully encourages a lot of Varroa into those cells prior to capping. But you have to make sure that you remove that frame before those drones emerge. Otherwise, all you're doing is helping the population of Varroa increase. I really would like to have seen some warmer weather, because the bees will draw that wax so much better if they have some warmer weather. However, we've got to get it in soon, because I really want to make sure that those colonies that have high Varroa numbers currently are given a chance to have a reduction in that population, and drone brood removal is going to be my preferred option, because I don't really want to use any chemical treatments in the spring. I think we're past the point now where colonies, certainly our colonies, are likely to starve. Most have plenty of food stores coming in, both nectar and pollen. And I believe that as we head forward into May, things are going to ease in terms of the temperature and the weather conditions, and the bees will certainly be able to store a surplus. Colonies will grow very quickly over the next week or two. I've seen an awful lot of brood that's been capped, and as that emerges, don't forget each frame will produce around 2 to 3 seams of bees. So expansion of colonies is really important, because those colony numbers will leap forward, and if they get congested, then that could well be a factor towards swarming. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website, www.norfolk-honey.co.uk, and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks, and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.